Thank you, Congressman Scott, for that generous introduction and for holding this panel today, and from other panelists that have joined us to address an issue that is present in so many of us as we move to try to finally get it right as America addresses the issue of criminal justice and our spending. As you mentioned, I'm Hilary Shelton, Director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Policy. On April 7th, the NAACP released a report called Misplaced Priorities. Our new report explores how America overspends on incarceration to the demise of expenses of quality public education, the impact of this disturbing trend, and outlines the specific reforms that our states can enact to reverse this trend. The fact of the matter is that for decades, tough on crime policies have resulted in too many Americans, a disproportionately high number who are racial and ethnic minority Americans, incarcerated at some point in their lives. There are currently 2.3 million Americans in our nation's jails and prisons. This is a 500% increase over the past 30 years. We now have 5% of the world's people and 25% of the world's prison population. Nearly 3/4, that is 72.1% of federal prisoners are serving time for non-violent offenses and have no history of violence. More than half, that is 55% of federal prisoners are serving time for doing time for drug offenses. 1/3, 34.4% of all federal prisoners are first-time non-violent offenders, and more than half, that is 55.7%, of persons sentenced for drug offenses in 2002 fell into the lowest criminal history category, that is Category 1 of the sentencing guidelines, and in 87% of cases, no weapon was actually even involved in the commission of crimes. In state prisons in 2008, there were 520,000 African Americans incarcerated. Almost half of those people were incarcerated for nonviolent drug or property offenses. A disproportionate number of those incarcerated are racial and ethnic minority Americans, and African Americans routinely receive more jail time and harsher punishments. African American men are 7 times likelier than white men to be in prison. Unless there are a change in policy, a black male born today has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison in his lifetime. Of the more than 2 million people who are currently incarcerated, nearly 1 million of them are African American. Although African Americans make up just over 12% of the national population, 42% of Americans currently on death row are also African Americans. Furthermore, African American women have the highest rate of incarceration among women in our nation, a rate that is 4 times higher than that of white women. The Get Tough movement has unleashed a wave of punitiveness that has trapped generations in ghettos and branded them criminals and felons. The result of this tough on crime atmosphere has been a caste-like system with millions of Americans, a disproportionate number of whom are racial and ethnic minority Americans, being stripped of the basic civil and human rights the NAACP has spent over 102 years fighting for, such as the right to vote, to serve on juries, to be free of discrimination in employment, housing, education, and public benefits. In addition to the human cost, the rush to incarcerate is bad policy from a fiscal standpoint as well. We locked up too many people, and it does nothing to make us any safer. As a nation, we spend about $60 billion annually to incarcerate. I said $60 billion. Incarceration is the largest public investment in many neighborhoods across the country. In Texas, as an example, taxpayers will spend over $175 million to imprison residents sentenced in 2008 from just 10 of Houston's 75 neighborhoods. From just 10 of Houston's neighborhoods. It is time to switch for what is failing to do what works. We must shift from so-called tough on crime policies that have failed us to being smart on crime policies. Isn't that amazing? As we introduced Congressman Bobby Scott, we recognize how smart he's been about being smart on crime. As state after state focuses budget shortfalls and is forced to limit essential services, cut employees' salaries and benefits, or fire them outright, it only makes sense from a fiscal point as well to re-examine every public cent that has been spent. As of March of this year, some 44 states and the District of Columbia are projecting budget shortfalls totaling $112 billion for fiscal year 2012. One result of these budget shortfalls has been in state after state, spending on colleges and universities has decreased, which oftentimes means tuition has increased. For example, in the 70s, California had the best public university in the world. They were very affordable. The state spent about 11% on public higher education and 3% on prisons. Today, however, the numbers are reversed, with the state spending 11% on prisons and 3% on public education. In California, as is the case across the nation, the public higher education system is now much less affordable, and no longer is it the best that it could be. So what's the solution? Well, in the Misplaced Priority Report, we offer several suggestions at the federal, state, and local levels to decrease prison costs while still reducing crime. We must shift from so-called tough on crime policies, which have proven to be only tough on state budgets, to smart on crime policies that will downsize the prison population, give treatment instead of incarceration for drug offenders, and invest in education over incarceration. Currently, we lock up too many people, and it does nothing to make us safer. In the past decade, New York cut its prisons, and the crime fell 16%. Meanwhile, Florida grew its prisons rapidly, and crime rose 16%. The report finds a link between incarceration and school performance. For example, the same neighborhoods that are driving the incarceration trends are those contributing most heavily to Houston's low school performance. In Houston, of the 6 lowest performing schools, 5 schools, that is 83%, are in neighborhoods with the highest rates of incarceration. In our report, we call for complete reviews of the federal, state, and local criminal justice system to look at what is working and what is not, and to look at the basic fairness of the systems. We also call for a specific and thorough review of the action of prosecutors and their impact on racial and ethnic minority defendants. We are also calling for a repeal of all mandatory minimum sentences, as well as a decrease in practices such as an end to racial profiling, which put a disproportionate number of racial and ethnic minorities in contact with law enforcement, of course leading to incarceration. With the savings we're recovering from the investing in incarceration, we can spend more on disadvantaged 3- and 4-year-olds in pre-K, making them strong readers before the 3rd grade by exposing them to millions of words their wealthier peers get to hear before entering kindergarten. We can invest in a longer school day and school years instead of long sentences, allowing kids to explore their interests through paid internships and service learning opportunities that deepen learning and count towards high school diplomas. Instead of investing in prisons, we can invest in future teachers, grooming students for high school and teaching in the distressed communities where we grew up, and give back to their neighborhoods rather than moving away and taking the resources out. Since our Misplaced Priority Report came out, we were pleased to see that a number of diverse individuals and groups on both sides of the ideological divide, both progressives and conservatives, have come together to support this provision, this approach, perhaps for different reasons, but still supporting the same proposals. Some of them, like Pat Nolan and the Justice Fellowship and the Prison Fellowship Ministries, have been fighting with us against the inequities and basic unfairness of the American criminal justice system for years. Others, however, like former Speaker Newt Gingrich and Grover Norquist, are fairly new to join our fight. However, they are inspired by the tremendous cost savings that this particular initiative will bring to all of our governments across the country. In fact, in the NAACP's press package, which you have copies of, you'll see that we've included copies of Speaker Gingrich's, former Speaker Gingrich's letter supporting our findings and our policy suggestions. We also have seen some of our nation's more conservative governors, including Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's in trouble for some other things right now, but he was right out there. and John Kasich of Ohio joined the fight to reform our criminal justice system. As California was careering towards bankruptcy last year, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger lamented that more money was spent in prisons than on education. Priorities have come out of whack over the years, he said. What does it say about any state that focuses more on prison uniforms than on caps and gowns? Well, he was right about that. Another Republican governor, John Kasich of Ohio, recently announced support for reducing penalties for nonviolent drug offenders as part of an effort to slash the size of state prison populations. Whatever their motive, we welcome these individuals and others who are in our ranks. They're working together to get the federal government, state governments, and local municipalities to take a closer look and to reform these priorities. Quite frankly, as I close, our prison system is eating our kids' future for lunch every day, and it must change. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.